Women subjected to the pair rarely survived. Those who did were left unable to eat, unable to speak, unable to bear children. Their bodies became monuments to pain, and medieval authorities made sure everyone knew why they'd been punished. In January 1524, in the town of Bamberg, in what is now Germany, a woman named Anna Weiler was sentenced to the pair for the crime of speaking heresy. Her actual crime? She'd questioned why priests could own property when Jesus had preached poverty. That single question asked once, in her own home, to her own family, was enough. They inserted the pear into her mouth and turned the screw until her jaw broke in 3 places. She died not from the device itself, but from choking on her own blood and shattered teeth. The official record states she was given appropriate punishment for blasphemy against holy doctrine. Her body was dumped outside the town walls, denied Christian burial. But here's what should terrify you. The pear of anguish wasn't considered exceptional torture. It was routine. Parish records from across medieval Europe listed as casually as we might list a parking fine. Applied the pear, subject confessed. Executed, following morning. That's the actual bureaucratic language they used. 3 sentences to describe the complete destruction of a human being, and they did this hundreds, possibly thousands of times across centuries. We'll never know the real number because so many records were destroyed, lost, or simply never written. Most women tortured with the pear were poor, illiterate, with no family to record their names. They vanished into history like they'd never existed, which, of course, was precisely the point. But torture wasn't always about extracting confessions. Sometimes it was about public humiliation, breaking a woman's spirit where everyone could see. They called it the scold's bridle, and it was a mask of iron fitted over the head with a metal plate that pressed into the mouth. Sometimes the plate was flat, sometimes it had spikes. Always, it was designed to cause maximum discomfort and shame. The crime it punished? Talking too much. Being argumentative, gossiping, nagging your husband, questioning authority. In other words, having opinions while female. The bridle was locked onto the woman's head, often tightened until it cut into her cheeks. Then she was paraded through town, led through the streets by a chain attached to the bridle, forced to walk while neighbors jeered and threw waste. Some women wore the bridle for hours, some for days. In the winter, the metal would frost over, sticking to facial skin and lips. When finally removed, it would tear away layers of flesh. Records from 17th century Scotland describe women left permanently disfigured, their mouths unable to close properly, their speech slurred for life. But the physical damage was secondary. The primary purpose was humiliation, to make every woman in town understand that their voices existed only with male permission. The ducking stool combined torture with a perverse kind of trial by ordeal. It was a wooden chair attached to a lever mechanism, positioned next to a river or pond. The accused woman was strapped in wrists, ankles, waist bound so tightly she couldn't move, then dunked repeatedly into freezing water. In medieval winter, the water temperature could drop near freezing. Each immersion caused the body to go into shock. The first dunk took your breath. The second filled your lungs with water. By the third or fourth, you were drowning in installments, dying bit by bit. They'd pull you up, count to 10 while you gasped and vomited water, then plunge you back under. The theoretical logic was insane. If you drowned, you were innocent. If you survived, you were guilty and would be executed anyway. Either way, you died. But drowning wasn't always the goal. Sometimes the ducking stool was just the beginning, a way to soften resistance before real torture began. Waterboarding, that technique we associate with modern interrogation, was commonplace in medieval dungeons. They'd tie a woman to a board, tilt her head back, place cloth over her face, and pour bucket after bucket of ice water over the cloth. The water would flood into her nose and mouth, creating the sensation of drowning even though she was breathing air. It left no marks, caused no permanent physical damage, but it broke minds with ruthless efficiency. And then there was the witch's chair, possibly the most comprehensive torture device ever created. It was made entirely of iron. the seat, the back, the arms, the leg supports. Every surface was covered in spikes, not long enough to pierce vital organs, just long enough to break skin and keep breaking it with every breath, every muscle twitch, every involuntary movement. Sometimes they heated it. Charcoal placed beneath the seat, burning slow and steady until the iron glowed dull red and the smell of burning flesh filled the chamber. Women were stripped naked and forced onto the chair, then strapped down so tightly they couldn't lift their weight off the spikes even for a second. The pain was immediate, comprehensive, and unrelenting. Each spike created its own point of agony. Movement made it worse. Staying still became impossible after minutes as muscles cramped and spasmed. The heated variation was used primarily in witch trials between 1,550 and 1,650 during the peak of European witch hysteria. An estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft, and approximately 75–80% of those executed were women. The witch's chair was a favorite tool of witch-finders because it produced confessions quickly. Women would admit to anything flying on broomsticks, consorting with demons, cursing livestock, causing storms after just an hour in the chair. The confessions were worthless. People will say whatever you want when you're burning them alive from below while spikes tear their flesh. But the confessions weren't really the point. The point was terror. The point was showing every woman in the region what happened to those who didn't conform. Let's talk about the scale of this horror. These weren't isolated incidents. This wasn't a few sadistic individuals acting alone. This was systematic, institutional, legal torture spanning centuries across all of Europe. Court records from medieval England show torture warrants issued for women at a rate 3 times higher than for men. Records from the Holy Roman Empire show similar patterns from France, from Spain, from Scotland. From every corner of medieval Christendom, the same story. Women were tortured more frequently, more severely, and for less serious accusations than men. Why? Because torture of women served multiple purposes. Yes, it extracted confessions. Yes, it punished perceived crimes. But more importantly, it maintained social control. It kept women silent, obedient, afraid. It reminded them that their bodies were not their own. They belonged to fathers, husbands, churches, kings, any man with enough authority to accuse them. The torture chamber was the enforcement mechanism of patriarchy made physical, and the men who operated these devices, the executioners, the priests, the judges, they weren't monsters. That's the most disturbing part. They were ordinary men doing what society told them was righteous work. They went home to families. They attended church. They believed they were serving God and justice, because that's what the system taught them. That women who stepped out of line deserved pain, and delivering that pain was holy duty. Here's what haunts me most. We know the names of the devices. We have detailed descriptions of how they worked. Museums display them behind glass, with little plaques explaining their historical significance. But we don't know the names of most women who died screaming on them. History recorded the tools, but erased the victims. Except for a few, the ones whose cases were so prominent they couldn't be buried. Women like Joan of Arc, burned at 19 for the crime of hearing God's voice and leading men into battle. Women like Agnes Waterhouse, the first woman executed for witchcraft in England in 1566, tortured until she confessed to owning a demonic cat. Women like Anna Goldie, executed in Switzerland in 1782, nearly into the modern era, after being tortured into confessing she'd bewitched a child. These names survive because their cases were unusual enough to be documented. But for every named victim, there were hundreds whose names were never recorded. Women tortured in village squares, in castle dungeons, in church basements. Women whose only record is a single line in a parish register, executed for heresy, or drowned for witchcraft, or just female, disposed of. They wanted these women forgotten. They wanted their resistance erased. They wanted every trace of their defiance removed from history so thoroughly that it was as if they'd never existed. But silence has echoes, and pain leaves marks that outlast any attempt at erasure. The torture methods changed. The explicit devices fell out of use. But the purpose behind them, controlling women through fear and pain that never fully disappeared, it just evolved, became more subtle, more socially acceptable. The witch trials ended, but the logic that fueled them persisted, that women who don't conform deserve punishment, that female bodies are sites for male control, that resistance must be broken. We tell ourselves we're more civilized now. We look at medieval torture devices in museums and feel superior, grateful we live in enlightened times. But every woman who's been told she asked for it, every girl taught that her body is shameful, every victim blamed for her assault, they're living with the legacy of those torture chambers. The devices are gone, but the message remains. Be quiet, be small, be obedient, or suffer the consequences. The women who died screaming in those frozen medieval dungeons deserve more than to be forgotten. They deserve to be remembered not as passive victims, but as people who refused to submit, who spoke when they were told to be silent, who loved when they were told not to, who existed boldly in a world designed to erase them. They lost. Most of them died horribly. But they didn't disappear. We're still here, still speaking, still refusing, still existing in defiance of every system that tried to break us. That's their legacy. That's what survives when the torture devices rust and the dungeons crumble. Want to explore more of the dark truths history tried to bury? Subscribe to Flow of History, because the stories they tried to silence are the ones that matter most.